Tuesday marks 2 months of a war launched by the US and Israel on Iran, a war that's reshaped the region and is hurting countries far beyond. On February 28th, the US and Israel struck Iran, assassinating its supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Khamenei was replaced by his son, and government institutions remain largely unchanged. A temporary ceasefire is now in place. Iran's health minister says that US-Israeli airstrikes killed more than 3,000 Iranians over the 5.5 weeks of fighting. Hospitals, homes, and historic sites lie in ruins. So does the Iranian economy, already crippled by years of Western sanctions. The conflict spilled over across the region, most acutely in Lebanon, where Iran-allied Hezbollah attacked Israel on March 2nd. Israeli attacks have since killed thousands of Lebanese, displaced more than 1 million more. And it's invaded southern Lebanon, razing villages to the ground. A ceasefire there is on the brink of collapse. Gulf nations weren't spared either. Iran tried to spread the cost of war by attacking its own neighbors, hitting energy infrastructure and civilian sites. The cost of the war has been felt worldwide. Rival blockades by Iran and the US on the Strait of Hormuz have upended global energy markets. Qatar's foreign ministry says that using the Strait of Hormuz as a political weapon is not acceptable and has warned against the possibility of a frozen conflict in the Gulf as the talks between the US and Iran hit an impasse.
On reopening the strait, first of all, we have said from day one, the act of blocking navigation through the strait is not something that can be justified or accepted in any situation. And using the strait as leverage in any political or military conflict is something that we refuse as a premise, and therefore anything that justifies or legitimizes the use of the strait as a political weapon, for us this is not accepted in any means. But we are engaging with all our interlocutors to get the strait opened as soon as possible. We believe it should have never been closed, and it should be opened immediately, regardless of other considerations going on in the region.
Let's bring in our guests here in Doha. We're joined by Mark Kimmitt, a retired US general and former Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. Joining us from Tehran is Mohammad Aslami, who's a political researcher, columnist and economist, and also here in Doha, Zaydoun Al-Kanani, the founding director of the Arab Perspectives Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. General, let's start with you. We just heard Qatar cautioning against the possibility of a frozen conflict in the Gulf. 2 months on, is that a realistic possibility?
I really don't. I think that the significant pressure on the world economy and what would look to be a formation of a coalition of nations willing to escort the tankers in and out and the fertilizer in and out, I don't see this as a frozen conflict, but an emerging solution.
Mohammad Aslami, we were hearing earlier that the White House is considering the latest Iranian proposals. Do we happen to know, or would you like to speculate, what's actually in those proposals?
I think that, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I think that the Iranians have declared that the Strait of Hormuz will not open in any ways unless the Americans stop the naval blockade. And regarding the negotiations, the Iranians will not going to negotiate with the Americans if the Americans wouldn't change their decision regarding the naval blockade too. So I think that, yes, the Iranians are thinking about the framework for considering some diplomatic settlements, but we have yet to see what's going on in the future.
Zaydoun, as we've been reporting, Gulf leaders were meeting today in Saudi Arabia after being directly hit during this conflict. They're still not shaping the negotiations, at least not directly. They don't have a seat at the table if and when those negotiations resume. Why?
Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have a say in the negotiations. The Islamabad talks wasn't unilaterally facilitated by the Pakistani mediators. Many regional actors have been involved in pushing for those negotiations to take place, such as Turkey and Egypt, and most prominently as well Saudi Arabia. Talks between the GCC countries and talks between the GCC and their international and regional allies have always existed since the beginning of the war. They are involved in the different format of the negotiations. It's just the level of the official term and the theme of their involvement that determines it to be a bit different. The Qataris used to be way more involved in the past in facilitating talks. The Omanis were also way more involved. The location, the geographical location of the negotiations being in Islamabad does not mean it's completely isolating the GCC perspective here.
General, President Trump says that Iran has asked him to lift his blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, with the strait still constrained and the US continuing to maintain pressure. How close are we to a miscalculation at sea rather than a diplomatic breakthrough, the longer this blockade goes on?
Well, first of all, I'm encouraged by the offer made by President Trump to lift the American portion of the dual blockade. I would just certainly hope that the Iranians reciprocate. And one of the reasons is for the very notion you mentioned, a miscalculation at sea. Some young Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps motorboat commander, speedboat commander, goes out in the middle of the Gulf, serendipitously hits a tanker or an American ship, causing casualties. I think that could cause the situation to blow up again.
Mohammed Aslani, Iran has in recent days engaged Russia, Oman and other regional mediators. Is that a sign of strength on its part, of confidence or of mistrust?
You know that right now the Americans missed the chance to negotiate with the Iranians. Right now, Iranians are engaging in so many different, important discussions with Pakistanis, with their Omani counterparts, and I should mention Russians. The Iranian Foreign Minister met President Putin. Their discussions was not only about the negotiations or the diplomatic solutions for the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. It was more than that, and it was about so many other topics that the Iranians and the Russians are thinking about collaboratively. So I think that when it comes to Strait of Hormuz, it is clear that the Iranians will not leave the Strait of Hormuz to go back to what was before the war.
Let's pause for a moment to take a look at the sticking points. Iran's latest ceasefire proposal focuses on ending the fighting first. Tehran says that it will reopen the Strait of Hormuz if Washington lifts its naval blockade on Iranian ports, but that nuclear talks would be delayed. US officials say that Trump is unhappy with Iran's proposal because it doesn't address Iran's nuclear program. Washington is pushing for a 20-year suspension of Iran's uranium enrichment program and the transfer of its highly enriched uranium stockpile. Tehran has rejected demands to abandon enrichment. Iran says that its nuclear program is civilian. It's also a signatory to the 1970 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Trump demands assurances that Iran will never be able to build a nuclear weapon. He's repeatedly criticized the 2015 nuclear deal for allowing some enrichment. So, General, we've just mapped out the standoff, no agreement on a deal or what a deal actually looks like. So what breaks the deadlock?
Well, first of all, that's in no way a deal. That's a proposal. There are two proposals, one from the Iranians, one from the Americans. I think more important than what breaks the deadlock is what doesn't move this along. And it's the notion that somehow the Iranians are saying, for the Strait of Hormuz being opened up, we want to kick the nuclear negotiations down the road to an indefinite period. That's what the Americans went to war for. There is very little chance that the Americans will accept any proposal that kicks the nuclear program down, kicks that can down the road.
And Zaydoun, with economic pressure continuing as far as the Gulf nations are concerned from the Strait disruption, are they pushing harder for a deal, any deal, or stronger guarantees?
I think in the short term, they're pushing harder, given that they're following a mindset of an emergency crisis. It's an existential direct threat to their geopolitical security. So in terms of the short term, they're also overlooking perhaps the divergences or the differences amongst the GCC political house, which is why they're trying to prevent the continuity of this war in the short term. But long term, one can imagine that there may be a diverse political approaches and opinions in the future relationship with Iran, in the future relationship between the GCC states, perhaps revisiting security arrangements that would ensure much more collective coordination between one another to ensure that they could be stronger together politically, institutionally, but also from a security perspective to prevent such an attack or such a direct threat happening in the future.
And Mohammed Aslani, with the Strait still restricted, does Iran see its control over the Strait as its main leverage in shaping the form of indeed the outcome of any negotiations?
Let me tell you something. After the war, there was a debate in Iran. It was not about the Islamic Republic. Most of the policymakers thought that the not controlling the Strait of Hormuz is a historical mistake by the Iranians. It's not about supporting the Islamic Republic. It is for Iranians. It's about supporting the Iranian nation and their right, the right of the nation to control their Strait of Hormuz. So I think that from the Iranian point of view, the Strait of Hormuz is much more than a tactical card. It's a strategic point of view regarding the Strait of Hormuz. And right now, the Iranians are open to discuss with every country regarding their free passage of the Strait of Hormuz based on the bilateral relations.
And General, last one to you. If talks remain stalled, does the military track start to take over again by default, even if neither side actually wants any further escalation?
Well, I actually think the middle point is that coalition of nations that will be blockade runners and escorting the ships in and out of the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran doesn't have that leverage of claiming sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz and a willingness to use military power against those blockade runners, I think they're going to find themselves in a very difficult position about trying to not have nuclear negotiations, because without the Strait of Hormuz, what do they have?
General Mark Kimmett, Mohammed Aslani and Zaydoun Al-Kinani, many thanks indeed to you.